I have known Elias Cord for 40 years, and I will tell you plainly, the man had buried his heart so deep that even he had forgotten where he put it. He never said so. Elias wasn't a man who said much of anything. But I worked his mesa ranch for 17 of those years, and I watched him go from a young man who'd laugh at a crooked fence post to a rancher who could go 3 days without opening his mouth to anyone, human or horse. His wife Clara died of a lung fever in the spring of '79. After that, the laugh left. The talking left. What stayed was the work, and Elias Cord was, I will give him that, the best worker I ever stood beside. It was the summer of '83 when Willa Drum rode into Caldera on the back of a freight wagon, her 2 boys wedged in beside a load of dry goods, all 3 of them looking like they'd been through the argument and lost. I wasn't in town that afternoon, but old Pete Sweeney told me about it later, and what he described was something I could picture clear as water. She stepped down from that wagon with a cracked valise in one hand and the older boy's hand in the other, Hank, 8 years old, dark-eyed and serious, and the little one, Cody, who was 5 and dragging one boot because the sole had come half loose. 20 cents in her coin purse. A husband 6 months dead from a crossing fever, buried somewhere east of the Aldrin Range. And 2 boys who hadn't eaten a full meal in 2 days. She went to the hotel first. The men behind the desk looked at her, looked at the boys, and told her the rooms were let. They weren't. She went to the mercantile looking for a position. The owner's wife told her they had no call for help. She went to the laundry, the bakehouse, and the livery. The liveryman at least was honest. He said he had no work but she and the boys could use the back stall if they needed a night's roof. That's where she was headed, the back stall of Harker's livery, when I came down the main street of Caldera on an errand for Cord and saw her standing in the dust with those 2 boys, looking at a notice board. Cord had tacked a card to that board 3 weeks prior. Wanted, a cook. Cord Mesa Ranch, North Canyon Road. Meals and quarters provided. I watched her read it. She read it twice. Then she looked down at the boys and seemed to be working something out in her head. Finally she looked up and saw me watching, and she said, without any particular tone, "You know this ranch?" I told her I worked it. She said, "Is the position filled?" I told her it wasn't. She said, "Then I'd be obliged if you'd take me to see about it." I want to tell you I said something useful or kind right then. What I actually did was look at her 2 boys and think about Elias Cord's face, and feel a cold worry settle in my chest. But she was looking at me steady and straight, and the little one, Cody, was holding her hand without a sound, and I thought, well, she's going to find out one way or another. "Come on, then," I said, and led them up the North Canyon Road. Cord was in the yard when we rode up, checking the shoe on his roan. He stood when he saw the wagon, and his face did the thing it always did, closed like a shutter. He watched Willa Drum step down with her valise and her 2 boys, and for about 10 seconds neither of them said a word. She spoke first. "I'm answering your notice. I can cook, I can mend, and I'll keep the place clean. My boys are no trouble." She said it the way a woman says something she has said many times and is tired of having to say. Cord looked at Hank. Looked at Cody. Looked back at Willa. He said, "Notice was for a cook. Not a family." "Yes," she said. "I understand that. But they're quiet, and they work, and I can't leave them in Caldera." I held my breath. Cord looked at the boys again. Cody had crouched down in the yard dust and was examining a flat stone with both hands, the way 5-year-olds will, as if nothing in the world was more worth his attention. Hank was watching Cord with those dark serious eyes, standing straight, not asking for anything. Something moved in Cord's face. I don't know what to call it, even now. He looked away, out toward the canyon wall, then back. "Supper's at 6, he said. "Kitchen's through there. Flowers in the blue crock." That was all. He went back to his horse's shoe. Willa Drum took her boys inside. What happened next was not fast, and it was not easy. Cord ate at one end of his long table and the 3 of them ate at the other, and he passed the salt without looking at anyone, and Willa cooked what she was asked to cook and nothing more than she was asked. She didn't try to charm him or soften him. She just worked. And the work she did was fine, better than fine. The kitchen ran cleaner than it had in 4 years, and the meals were the kind a man could look forward to, and she found small things wrong around the house and fixed them without being asked, a loose hinge here, a cracked window cocked there, the kind of steady attention that tells you someone is taking the place seriously. It was Cody who started it. 3 days in, Cord came in from the range at dusk and found the boy asleep in the barn, curled up in the hay next to Cord's old cattle dog, a gray-muzzled hound named Russ who hadn't had much interest in people since Clara died. The boy had his arm thrown over the dog's neck, and Russ was asleep too, his chin on the boy's shoulder. Cord stood in the barn door and looked at that for a long moment. He didn't say anything. But the next morning when Cody came to the kitchen table, there was a small carved wooden horse sitting beside his plate. No explanation. Cord was already outside. Hank was the one who asked him about it, blunt as his mother. "Did you make that?" "Long time ago," Cord said, and went out. "I saw all of this. I was there for most of it, and what I saw was a man relearning how to be in the same room as people who needed something from him. Not money or promises, just steadiness. Just the ordinary decency of a door not slammed, a plate of food, a carved horse left without ceremony beside a small boy's breakfast. It was costing him something to do it. You could see that too. Some mornings he was short and some mornings he walked to the fence and stood there a while, looking out, before he came back inside. But he always came back. Willa, for her part, never pushed. She saw what I saw and she let it be. It was 7 weeks in when Harlan Birch rode up the canyon road. Birch ran a land concern out of the Aldrin Basin, and he had been buying up failing claims all summer. He'd had his eye on a strip of mesa land that butted up against Cord's north pasture, land that Willa's husband, as it turned out, had paid a deposit on before he died. The paperwork was tangled. Birch had a lawyer in his pocket and a way of talking that made complicated things sound simple and simple things sound like they'd already been decided. He sat his horse in Cord's yard and told Willa, with Cord standing 10 feet away, that the claim her husband had filed was invalid on account of the payment lapsing, and that she owed him, Birch, a sum of money for the inconvenience, or else she could clear out of the territory and he'd call it square. He said it pleasantly. He had a pleasant way about him that I always found more troubling than a man who just yelled. Willa said, "The payment didn't lapse. I have the receipt." Birch said the receipt wasn't the issue, the filing was, and the filing had a problem, and his lawyer had paperwork. He said all of this while barely looking at her, the way a man does when he's already decided the conversation is over. Cord said, "Birch." That was it. Just the name. Birch looked over at him. "The filing's clean," Cord said. "I watched her husband sign it myself, and I was a witness on the paper. You want to take that argument to the land office in Caldera, you go ahead. I'll be there." That was a surprise to Birch, and I could see him recalculating. Cord's name meant something in this territory. Cord wasn't a man you called a liar in public and walked away easy. Birch tried once more, said the matter was between himself and the widow, and he didn't see where Cord came into it. Cord took one step toward him. Just one. "You're on my land," he said, "and she's under my roof. That's where I come into it." Birch looked at Cord for a moment. Then he turned his horse and rode back down the canyon road, and I never saw him in Caldera again. Willa stood in the yard after he left, and for the first time since she'd arrived, I saw her hands shake, not from fear, I think, but from the release of having held herself so still for so long. She turned to Cord and said, "Thank you," and her voice was plain and direct, the way all her words were. Cord said, "You don't have to thank me." He meant it as the end of the conversation. She let it be that. But that night, after the boys were in bed, I was on the porch smoking my pipe when I heard them talking in the kitchen, low, slow talk, the kind that doesn't have any particular destination. I didn't listen to the words. I just heard the sound of it, two people at a table with the lamp between them, talking without hurry, and I sat there and thought, well, there it is. It was 2 weeks after that when Cord asked me to ride into Caldera with him on an errand I didn't understand until he walked into the land office and had the receipt and the filing witnessed and certified and filed again under both their names, his and Willa Drum's. He came out and handed her the copy and said, "That's yours. Nobody touches it now." She looked at the paper a moment. Then she looked at him. "Elias," she said, first time I'd heard her use his given name, "why did you do this?" He was quiet long enough that I thought he wasn't going to answer. Then he said, "Because you worked for it, and you deserve to keep it." He paused. "And because I'd like it if you stayed." "Not as the cook." She was quiet too, then. The street of Caldera moved around them, a wagon going past, somebody calling to somebody from a doorway, all the ordinary noise of a town that had turned her away with 20 cents and 2 hungry boys 4 months ago. "My boys come with me," she said. "I know that," he said. "That's part of it." She looked at him for a long moment, the way a woman does when she's reading whether a man means what he's saying. Whatever she found, it satisfied her. She folded the paper and put it in her coat. "All right, then," she said. Cody named the dog something new that fall, wouldn't tell anyone what it was for a week, then announced it was Russ II, because the original Russ deserved a good name carried on. Cord laughed at that. First time I'd heard him laugh in 4 years. Hank looked at me with those dark eyes and I looked back at him, and we both just let it happen. I don't know exactly when it was that Elias Cord remembered he had a heart. Maybe it was the carved horse. Maybe it was standing in front of Harlan Birch and hearing himself say, "She's under my roof." Maybe it was the kitchen lamp and 2 people talking without hurry. But I know this, by the spring after Willa came, the shudder in his face was gone, and the ranch was a place where a man could want to be, and in the evenings the 4 of them sat on the porch above the canyon while the last light went red on the rock walls, and Cord's hand rested on Willa's, easy and quiet, like it had always been there. I worked that ranch for another 9 years after that. Best 9 years I ever put in. Some men forget what they're made of. Sometimes it takes a woman with 20 cents and 2 hungry boys to remind them.